Hello and welcome back to Core Finance. I'm Matt Brown and this is a special segment. The reason being a little cab hut opposite us has today been given a grade 2 listing by Historic England, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce onto the show Colin Evans, who is a cab driver and also has a few other titles. How are you today, Colin?
Very well, thank you. Very well.
Good.
Yeah, I do have a few titles. I'm relevant today is I'm a trustee of the Cab Shelter Fund, and as I said, it's a registered charity. So we support, so we do rely on that charity fund quite a lot. And today it was about being given grade 2 listing. And that's a great thing, because that means that's 9 shelters that we've got now that I've got grade 2 listings, and that secures them, their future for them. And it means that we can continue to refurbish them and to maintain them. We're down to 13 shelters, and we're actually only operative in 11 at the present time. And so we can see that they are decreasing. The original shelter was in 1875, and that was in St John's Wood. And it came about because the cabbies at that time, which was horse-drawn and four-wheeled carriages, was on a bad night, if it was windy, rainy, or the weather was really cold and miserable, the drivers would end up in the pubs and the bars, and they would be drinking, and of course, consequently, after they'd been drinking, they was in no state to actually drive people around. So a gentleman of the day in St John's Wood, a Captain Armstrong, couldn't get a taxi for that very reason, and decided that he could see where the problem was. The drivers were in the pubs, so he needed to make sure they could get them out of the pubs, put them somewhere where it was temperate, so they didn't have any alcohol that they could have, and they would be sheltered from the wind and the rain. The poor horses were still had to be outside, of course, but that was the fundamental idea of the Cabin Shelter Fund, and it was created by this gentleman, Captain Armstrong, and they had donations from people like the Prince of Wales, the Earl of Shaftesbury, many politicians of the day. And consequently, in 1875, the first shelter was put up in St John's Wood. It eventually went up to 60 shelters. And up to the First World War, there was 60 shelters. After the war, which decimated the taxi trade, as it did many people, the cab trade lost quite a number of its licences because and it's relevant at the moment because the First World War anniversary. What the government wanted and the armies wanted was soldiers, obviously, horses, people who could manage horses, people who could stable horses, and people who could drive a motorised vehicle. And at that particular time, there was 50% of the trade was motorised, which was a new way of coming, and 50% was still horse-drawn. Consequently, the government requested that these go out to fight on the front, and consequently the cab trade was decimated. They went from about 8,338 licences at that time to, after the war, about 1,200. So it was a real decimation, and of course it was very difficult to get parts and things. So all through that period, the cab shelters were still around, but they actually started to decrease. The issue today with the cab shelters is that it's in our history. We need to keep those shelters. We need to get the drivers to use them. That's a very important part. And sometimes the younger drivers feel a bit intimidated by going into the shelters with the older drivers there.
But they're for the public as well.
Well, the public,
the one opposite the road.
Absolutely.
So great cheese rolls and whatnot.
You won't get a better bacon sandwich than the one across the road. It's a great shelter. The shelter keeper Sue. Go along and meet her. She's always there, always got a friendly face, and you get a good cup of tea and a bacon banjo for not a lot of money, not as much as it costs you in Pret a Manger and all those other coffee bars. So it's important, and the licensees earn their money from that. There's a cab rank there, so we want the drivers to use it as well. That's quite important. And because it's now grade 2, it means from us as trustees that we now have to make sure that shelter is restored and kept in a good condition up to that grade 2 listing, which in itself is not an easy thing. Probably a refurbishment of one of those shelters is about £30,000.
Right. So, but it's here to stay. That's the main thing.
Well, it is here to stay. Unfortunately, it's right opposite you, and
No problem with that.
And so your bacon sandwiches and bacon banjos, as they call them, will be looked after. No worries about that.
Fantastic.
We put a special status on you, by the way. You say, go over there, you get
a discount.
extra cup of tea. Yeah.
Good stuff. So
buy one, get one free.
And that's based in Grosvenor Gardens. So now how many are listed grade 2 now? Out of all of them?
It's around 9 of the remaining shelters are grade 2 listed. Mm-hmm. And we're really pleased about that. It's been recognised, and we managed to make the Times, which is not a bad thing, is it? You know. And we've been doing some interviews today, apart from yourselves, with Australian Broadcasting, BBC, ITN, a couple of little minor news outlets. So it's good for the trade. It's good for the trade that we're seeing recognised, and the shelters. And people actually realise what the shelters are. Many people walk past them and they're not quite sure what they are. And they can't put. They think, "This is a funny thing. What is it?" And we all say to people that, yeah, it's only a little shelter from the outside, but when you go in, it's like the TARDIS. You know, it's like time and relative distance in space in that little shelter over the road.
And so is bacon sandwiches.
And so is bacon
and banjos.
And bacon banjos.
I know that now. Well, fantastic. Well, keep up the good work, Colin, and it's great that we know that's going to be there serving food.
Well, thank you for supporting us, and thank you for having me today.
Absolute pleasure. Colin, thanks very much for joining us.
Cheers.
Welcome.